Sahana vavatu, Sahanau bhunaktu, Sahaviryam karvavahe, Tejasvinavaditam astu ma vidvishavai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great strength and vigor. May our study be of the nature of illumination. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So, as I said, I'll make a pause while some question gets formulated.
Swamiji, I have one about agency. In the last couple of talks in the Upanishad, you brought this about that we have no agency and we are not the doer. And how do we understand that correctly? Because then we can also say, well, I've done something silly. I'm not the doer, so I have no responsibility if I have no agency. So how do we interpret that correctly?
Okay, so that's a good question. And it's also in line with the question I had in the WhatsApp in the text. So actually, a very, very good answer to this question is contained in a piece of literature called Drg-Drsya-Viveka. And it's about probably a 14th century text, early 1300s. But here we see Drg-Drsya. Drg means the perceiver, and Drsya means the thing that is perceived, the object that is perceived. To understand whether anything exists or not, there have to be at least two things. There has to be something that sees and the object that is seen. And then what is the object that is seen? So we have a text called Drg-Drsya, which deals with these in the very beginning. So it's worthwhile bringing this up. The very first stanza will tell us that, and I'll bring a translation up. The form, what do we mean by the form? That is anything that is our experience through the sense organs. We don't really know anything other than through the sense organs on the one side, and then the subtle forms, the subtle things that are noticed on the other side. So the form is perceived and the eye is its perceiver. Physical eye, standing for all the sense organs, is perceiver. And then the eye is perceived by something else. We are cognizant that we can actually be aware of the sense organs. For example, the normal example I bring up is concerning the eye. We can see whether the eye is one moment a little scratchy, or one moment it is fresh. We can see whether we require eye drops or otherwise. So this is known to us. What is called the mind? And the mind, of course, if we take the mind along the lines of the Sankhya geography, that the mind comprises a number of different functional components, all with their purpose. When we normally say that I am doing something or I am responsible for something, what we're doing is we're misunderstanding the final datum, the final point of analysis. There has to be a final point. And that final point cannot be seen or observed. Otherwise, we then go on what is called an infinite regression. We have to find another observer. So there has to be some final observer at the end of all the chain of observations. And this goes according to fields of observations. Let me be a little bit more specific. Right now, sitting here at a desk in front of me, you'll see that there are many, many different forms. There's a floor, there's a flooring, there's a curtain, there are windows, there's somebody sitting here, there are chairs, and I can hear, if my attention is shifted, I can hear an airplane in the distance. We're not that far from the airport. I can also hear my own breathing. I can hear any form of shuffling, but it requires me to shift something, some instrument that I have, something like a probe, toward its object. And so the sense organs engaged with the attention together make my experience, but what's in front is a whole multiplicity of things. If I had eyes at the back of my head, some parents will tell their children that, don't misbehave, I have eyes at the back of my head. But of course, the beauty about Zoom is I can actually probably see some entity looking like a bearded fellow in front and a Christmas tree in the back. But then the instrument can be noticed and seen. The shift of the attention can be noticed and seen. The mind itself can be seen as to whether it's happy one moment, sad the next, whether it is distracted or concentrated. And everything that goes on in what we call the mind is a whole series of activities that display themselves in the context of a sequence. We call the sequence time. And we observe all these things in the external world as well. We observe all these events. And these have dimensions. They have properties, such as color, such as shape, hardness, softness. And these are all relative terms. Don't ask me conclusively if something is small, because from an ant's point of view, it's huge. From an elephant's point of view, it's tiny. From my point of view, it may be neither small nor large, medium size. So all of these experiences are all in the relative world. Relative to what? Relative to my seeing capacity, my sense capacity, but also relative to my interpretation. My experience tells me. If you ask a child about perspective, they won't have a clear idea. This comes out in their art. They think that the sky is a line drawn. They can't comprehend that our perception is that the sky comes down, as it were, to the ground because of the round nature of the earth. And so the horizon is there. If you're an artist, you'll begin painting. You'll paint a line on a canvas if you want to paint a scene. More or less midway in the canvas, sometimes a little less. Then if you're painting a scene, the next thing that you'll do is, above this line, you paint everything shades of blue. You may leave out a few patches here and there, and then blur it to be clouds. And then you paint the bottom section, the earth, and then you put in the foreground possibly a figure, a tree or something like that, or a tree's shadow. Or you put in a lake, something like that, below. You put some maybe mountains above the line. But a child doesn't have that perspective at all. So we have learnt a way of seeing things and thinking of things. What is necessary, therefore, for all experiences, the objective field in front, containing so many different objects, all with different dimensions and properties. And then the instrument that sees it, that represents another scene that is seen by something that we might call a mind, including awareness, including interpretation. Behind that, there'll be an intellect, a discerning faculty. All of this we can collectively register I, except the object. We make that distinction. The ultimate object that we see in the physical world, we take as separate from this perceiving apparatus. But the intellect itself, that shines lights on things, as it were, that determines what a thing is, that makes choices, that acts as an executive officer to say, let me do this, let me do that. All of this collectively is down to a managing component in the mind itself, in the internal instrumentation. And that we call aham, ego, we register an I there. But really, in reality, the ultimate seer behind everything, which is attached to all the other preceding fields. This is technically called jiva. I mentioned this yesterday when we spoke about the Kathopanishad, that the agency that we attribute to I, when we look at it properly, is not there. The function of agency isn't there. Because the ultimate I is that which cannot be seen. You can never see yourself. That's the fact of it. Even if we use the example of a mirror, you put yourself, your body, your physical body, your appearance, the thing that we normally take I as a body-mind complex, you sit it in front of a mirror. Ah, what a grand entity stands in front of you, beaming itself back at you. You put a smile on, the mirror image also smiles. Put a frown on, the mirror image also frowns. You come to the conclusion that you don't look as you did when you were some 20, 30 years older, or younger, I should say, that the older thing reflects something different, and you may declare your mirror to be a liar. There's only wishful thinking. So it reflects what is there physically in front. What it does not tell you is who is the seer, only indirectly. The seer is the one that is seeing, and the seer can never be seen. The knower ultimately can never be known, and the seer ultimately can never be seen. So that is the nature of things. This mix-up, as it were, this misidentification that we call I, with all the other accoutrements around it and associations around it, declaring this single individuality is technically caused by ajnana, ignorance of our own true nature. And that means our whole purpose in life is to discover this seer and the nature of this ultimate seer. And we can do this by making a discrimination. Very gradual, progressive discrimination that says, at the end of the day, the philosophical neti comes up. That is, who am I? I am not this. Whatever is in front, I am clearly not that. That's clear. We accept it. We don't make any mistake about that. But we make a mistake about the seer. There's no doubt that all the sense organs see and observe the external world, but it's not the final seer. Because there's another subtle entity. And the more we go inward, the subtler the seer becomes. And the vast array before us is what we call a field. In the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, this is called, in beautiful poetic language, the knower of the field and the knower of the field. Kshetra, field, kshetratya, the knower of this field, making a distinction. It is very obvious to us that any perception has these two aspects to it, the thing that is seen and the thing that is sees, the observer and the observed, the perceiver and the perceived. Now, if you like, I can bring a little modern science into this. Modern actually means probably 100 years old, but not fully understood today, not fully appreciated today. So I'll tell it again. And don't worry if you understand or not. You can investigate it for yourself. But one of the most remarkable scientific discoveries in the 20th century was what we call special relativity. It tells us that things look different from different angles. There's no standard view of everything unless you take the total time-space separation between two events into account. And there we find there's absolutely no difference between what we see and the seer. Now, all along now, I've been telling you that there's a difference. Now, modern science is saying, no, there's no difference. But the final Vedantic conclusion also says that there's no real difference. And here we have to bring in the word seeming. It seems to be like that. It is portrayed like this because we don't take into account this relativity subject, relativity of perception. Things will look different if according to how you change the angle, but everybody has the same perception when it comes to the total time-space separation between two events, and it goes to zero. Because Einstein added to the already accepted 3 dimensions, Euclidean dimensions, added one more dimension, that is time. And so the time-space separation, if it is equal, goes to zero if there's nothing else that interferes with it. Einstein puts this in vacuo, he mentions. That means as if there was no other force interfering with it. That's the fact of it. Do we have some practical experience of this? Yes. In a dream, we have this experience. We know that all the trees and flowers and people and events and cars, mountains, sky, they all come from the dreamer. The dream is manufactured from a dreamer. Now in this waking world, it seems that science will tell us the same thing, that all the perception is manufactured, as it were, by the perceiver. Only one thing, that there's no difference. We knew this about dream, but basically we didn't know it about the waking state in contemporary times. But now we know it, and we can agree with the ancient philosophers that came to the same conclusion, that what we call a waking state is really just a projection of some kind, like a movie that is put onto a substructure, superimposed. Superimposition is the nature of it, just as we superimpose a dream. But you see, when objects and subjects are not there, when all the objects disappear, we call this deep sleep. And in this deep sleep, there is this bifurcation, and this multiplicity doesn't come in. And for this reason, we say we had a nice peaceful sleep, because there was no second person to argue with. There was no other episode in front of us to disturb our equilibrium. There was no financial affairs were there. The taxman wasn't there. The awkward person wasn't there. All of that is gone. And these ancient philosophers noticed this. They understood this. They said, you know what? The stage of life, if Shakespeare is correct, all the world is stage and we are but players, has at least 3 variations in it. It is one variation is the part we play. And when we say we have agency and we are responsible, we forget that we are playing a part. And we may say, from the part's point of view, we have to be responsible. From the part's point of view, we are an agency. And when you join these two together, if an actor forgets his lines, then it's the actor's fault. If the actor stumbles or doesn't make an entrance at the appropriate time, then this entity is mistaken. We can't do away with the responsibility of the actor. When the actor is identified with the role or playing the role, so the idea of morality comes in to the actor and that which is being acted on. The agency, if you will. Yes, but the reality of it is that another stage can be viewed. And I mention this very frequently, so you recognize my example. Supposing I'm sitting in the audience, watching all the other actors on the stage. Can this be an equivalent example? Can this be an equivalent analogy to a dream world? Very often in a dream, I'm not identified even with myself, or so-called physical self of the waking world in the dream. And then when there's no actors, when the stage lighting goes off, only stage lighting actually is there, the curtains are drawn, all the actors are gone, all the scenery gone, just a blank, we can say this is a dreamless sleep. But in all three cases, there is a perceiver. In the case of the actor is perceiving all the scenery around, internally perceiving all the lines being read, catching the character of the part being played in the audience, from the audience point of view. There is a witness, the audience itself. And in a dreamless sleep, that is when the stage has been completely cleared, a witness is there to see it. It is the same witness that is playing the part. It is the same witness that is witnessing the play. And it is the same witness that is witnessing the peace and the blank of a dreamless sleep. It's quite a useful analogy. Now, in a drama, we don't make the error that I am the part I am playing. So what does our philosophy say? Does it make some practical sense? Yes. You see, if I am not engaged, if I am distinct, if this Drg-Drsya-Viveka takes place, this discernment between these two things takes place, in the same way as when I play a part on the stage, then what will be the result? I won't be affected in the same way as if I identified myself with what is seen. So this is all easy to talk about from a philosophical point of view, but it requires some coaching, it requires some training. We have to train the mind to understand this. And for this reason, buddhi, that is the intellect, is a key factor in this. I will have to persuade the intellect through reasoning. I'll have to persuade the intellect through rallying around the sense organs, rallying around the emotions, rallying around all the things that I'm identifying myself with. And for this reason, we have wonderful, wonderful equipment to help us do this. So, I am not the chariot, I'm not the car, I'm not the reins, I'm not the horses, I'm not the objects that are distinct from it. I am not the intellect either. I am the one that has the capacity to observe it and use it also. And even if I understand this momentarily, the whole state of mind changes. I become calmer. I become less involved, less agitated. Or the great goal that I want, which is peace of mind and joy and happiness and so on and so forth, automatically is there as soon as I detach from it. So the 19th century great mystic Ramakrishna Paramahansa uses this example of a bird, a kite flying in the sky. He just grabbed something. You can use any bird, a crow perhaps. When we look in Ireland, we see crows competing for each other. Crows and seagulls, maybe. So you see one bird catch a piece of food and go off and gets harassed by all the other birds and only finds peace when he drops it. And then they leave him alone, they pursue the food instead. In this same way, when we detach ourselves from the various objects, we get a lot of peace. That doesn't mean to say, though, that we should withdraw and retreat from life. We should always bear in mind this dictum that Shakespeare gives us, that all the world's a stage and we are but players, and take that as it is. So what does this Drg-Drsya tell us? Oh, sorry, I've lost the place here now. Bear with me. I have to go back to the beginning. I'm doing this on a Kindle, so I find it's not that easy to maneuver. So we'll go to the first stanza here. That's it. Okay. So it says like this in translation: the form is perceived and the I is its perceiver, but there are footnotes to this. The direct and immediate knowledge of Atman or self, that is, that supreme witness, is the means to the attainment of liberation. Of course, when we found it, and when we're immersed in it, as it were, when we stand alone in it, it's no longer called the witness. It's no longer called the seer. There's nothing else to see. All the other things disappear by themselves because of the illusory nature of what we are observing. Illusory means it's constantly changing, and we can't fix it as real in one moment or the other. In other words, it's only relatively real. It relies on avenues of perception. So the direct and immediate knowledge of Atman or self is a means to the attainment of liberation. And that is a very interesting statement because it is not through theology, it is not through dogma or doctrine. Direct perception is really the only means. The understanding of the meaning of the great Vedic statement, Tattvamasi, one of the Mahavakyas, thou art that, enables one to realize the goal of life. These first few stanzas in this Drg-Drsya-Viveka are to do with this statement, thou art that, taking first thou. What are you? Who is this entity that observes and sees? The meaning of that thou art is correctly grasped by understanding the sense of the words contained in the statement, and so points out the first 5 shlokas of this treatise will tell us this. But what is form? What do we mean by form? Well, the word implies all objects of sense perception. But all objects is a lot of things. These are multiple things. And the characteristic of any field of observation would be multiplicity and change. And then what is the eye? What is meant by the eye? It stands for all the organs of perception, nose, ears, and so on and so forth. The prominent one is vision, eye. It, that is the eye, is perceived. By what is it perceived? And the mind is its perceiver. What do we mean by mind? By mind, we mean the sense organs. Unless the mind is attached to them, we can't perceive any objects. Swami Vivekananda in his Raja Yoga gives that example. If I'm speaking and in his day there weren't cars or carriages are rolling down the road, maybe you'll be hearing the carriages. Or if my talk is interesting enough, you won't hear them at all. It is not the eye or the ear that perceives. It is the mind that sits behind us. But the organs themselves are multiple. 5 of them are there. And organs of reaction, 10 are there. We can observe all of them. It is the mind that is observing not only that field of the instrumentality, but also the field of the objects in front. Now 2 fields are merged and presented collectively together. The mind itself is a field. And so, in a state of deep sleep, the sense organs, they don't perceive anything because the mind at that time doesn't function. There's a blank. When it functions, we have what we call dream. When we talk in Patanjali Yoga Sutras of 5 particular types of waves in something called the chitta, the mind stuff, a great local area of cosmic energy, psychic energy, collected in a certain spot, as it were. Then, when we talk of these 5 states of mind or 5 types of waves, what is dream? Dream is not mentioned specifically. Memory is mentioned, and deep sleep is mentioned. So, what is dream? Dream is deep sleep plus memory. It's a wonderful definition. And so, deep sleep, we don't find anything. The mind is not functioning. Its modifications, the mind with its modifications, that includes all the various components of the mind. It's useful to find out what these components are and repeat this. I mentioned the sense organs themselves, replayed internally. we mentioned that something called manasa. Unfortunately, mind. But also mind is used for the collective thing. To save the confusion, the totality we can call an internal instrument. Antakarana, internal instrument. So this thing called manasa is there. And then there is also buddhi, the determinative faculty. So when we say collectively, we're talking about this buddhi, this intellect, as well as the total mind stuff called chitta, objective consciousness, and the sense of I, this thing called egoism, or ego is there. So the witness self, all these modifications, all these various changes, all the objective things, all the multiplicity, all the different forms, all the different properties, all of these are perceived. When what is the ultimate perceiver then? So this ultimate perceiver is the mind is controlled by the conscious self. My mind was elsewhere, I did not see, is an expression we all use. The commentator here also points this out. It was a phrase in his day as well. The fact is that the ultimate perceiver, what we technically call Atman or self, the ultimate self, the authentic self, the self that never changes, the real seer, the real observer, the innermost self is the ultimate perceiver. And if a perceiver of the Atman has to be looked for, then our inquiry will end in what is known as this regressus ad infinitum, infinite regression. Somebody has to see that, then who sees that, and who sees that, we go off forever. There has to be a full stop to it. To all entities from the gross objects to the mind, these are all products of one thing, a mistake. Now knowledge we call vidya, but the opposite is called avidya, ignorance. And this ignorance is said to be insentient. Like a cobweb, you can poke it, it'll just bounce. But the sentient component in the whole totality is the spider. You put a stick toward it, it'll run. You put a stick to the web, it'll just stay there, inert, and bounce. Now the example of a spider and a web is very apt. We find an example of that in the Upanishads. How is it that one entity can produce, that is sentient fully, consciousness itself, can produce something which is insentient? Well, a spider can do it. A spider doesn't require a partner. There's no Mrs. Spider. A spider produces a web from itself. And that is the wonderful example. A dreamer produces a dream from itself. And so when we project something, we can use even modern examples, how the film is projected from a projector on a blank wall. All these are great examples of what we mean. Hence, says the commentator, they also partake of the nature of insentiency. Therefore, they are objects. That's how we make a distinction between object and subject. The subjective character of some of these is only relative. But the self, the ultimate self, the Atman, is the ultimate seer, because there's no other seer is known to exist. The awareing or knowing nature of the knower is never absent. The fact that an actor plays the part still retains the consciousness of his own individuality in the example I give. So what are these forms? Objects of perception. They appear as various things, multiple things, on account of such distinctions as, and the text actually mentions Blue, yellow. Blue and yellow are colors picked up by the eye, gross and subtle, a sense of proportion, sense of size, short or long, sense of dimensions. The eye, on the other hand, sees them, itself remaining one and the same, one unit, seeing the multiplicity. The forms, etc., are objects of perception, which are varying. That which is constant and changeless, that is the perceiver. The different objects appear, no doubt, as distinct from one another, but they are perceived with all their changes because of the faculty of time, because the eye as perceiver is a unity. They all belong to one category, namely that which is the objective thing which is seen. And with reference to the objects, then the eye is perceiver. With reference to the eye, the mind is the perceiver. With reference to the mind, the intellect is the perceiver. With reference to the intellect, there is the seer. The one characteristic of all objects is their changeability. Change is possible only in things which are imagined with reference to something that is non-changing. A river flows by because there's a solid, unchanging bank. Or I'm not flowing with the river also. The idea of three states of consciousness, we know these are objects. Why? Because there's a constant witness standing on the platform like a station master, seeing three trains coming and going, waking and dream and sleep, one after the other. I didn't come with the first one. I'm not leaving with the last one. So, a substratum, as in the case with the snake superimposed on a rope, or a stick superimposed or appearing, as it were, as a man with a hat, or a water line, you take a body of water and you draw a line on the water. It's not a real line. Or things like that. Things falsely imagined, for example, in a rope. These ideas are subject to change. The characteristic of the seer is unchangeability. So the objects change, but their perceiver is constant. The appearances, like the snake, etc., change, but the rope is constant. And this is only the second stanza of this great work of just over, not more than 50 stanzas, 40 stanzas and odd. So such characteristics of the eye, such as blindness, sharpness, or dullness, then the mind is able to cognize because it is a unity. See the pattern? The observer must always be a unity, and what is being observed must always be a multiplicity. The observer must be unchanging. What is in front must be changing. So we can see there's a temporary unit called eye, the eyeball, seeing a multiplicity of objects. But then we can see the various characteristics of the eyeball itself. And we can see that there's more than one sense as well. A multiplicity, a changeability, a conditionality, a relativity. Things are like that in relation to a unity that observes it. What is that unity? We call this intellect. But you'll see the intellect also has vagaries. What I think tomorrow, I don't think today. I feel happy one moment, sad the next. I feel judgmental one moment. I feel generous the next. All these various characteristics are there. I make a good judgment call on one day. I make a fool of myself the next. See, all of these are variabilities, changeabilities, and they are observed by one single observer. So we can go through each stage using as a criteria changeability and multiplicity. In contrast to that, a united observer. But then does that observer also comprise a field? And the final observer must incorporate all the fields in front. they can all collectively merge into each other. And we can see all these various aspects, we can see all these various scenes in front. But only one seer can be there. So this is a very logical presentation. But how is it that we make this big mistake? And the characteristic of the mistake we call Maya. We say that we made a mistake because we superimposed unnecessarily the seer on the scene. And then, of course, the famous examples will all be there. Most famous of all probably will be what has just been mentioned, where my vision is not quite right. Well, right knowledge is necessary, right vision is necessary. Great deal of training, discipline. Disciplining the mind, self-control is also necessary. But there has to be an enthusiasm in the first place. We have to say, I have a purpose, I have a direction. And if I'm not following this, then dissatisfaction follows me to the point of pain. How to get out of this? So I have to have a thirst for truth. Now, very often a question is asked, a thirst for truth, is that the same as a thirst for God? Yes, it is. The only difference is you've personalized the truth into a living, breathing entity that is real for the devotee, and an entity that, within the scope of the relative world, is a ruler, can be listened to, can be talked to, can be close to. Most people will find this the best possible way. It's not the only way. We have a love of truth. We want to know what is the reality, what is the thing that is stable and never changes. What is that peace that passeth the understanding? Please let me find it. And with that spirit, adventurous spirit, we might say, a spirit that incorporates a sense of determinism. I'm determined to get to the end of this, to find out what is the absolute truth. And I'm dedicated to it. I eat and breathe and sleep. It becomes a magnificent obsession for me. Day and night, no holiday for it. That level will bring a quick opening, a revelation of the truth. Same thing in the devotee's heart. The intense love quickens the opening, quickens the revelation. And so one of the great conditions for our spiritual life, to be a student, understanding that there can also be a teacher, a guru, competent teacher. Would there be a qualification for a student? Yes. And above all else, a thirst for freedom, a thirst for the truth. We can put it in the language of the devotee, a thirst for God. It is this thirst, this great, magnificent obsession that will very, very quickly find its result. It's the same with everything. Everything requires 3 Ds. It requires a great desire. It requires determination. It requires dedication. We can add another one in the process. If we have all of that, we'll have discipline also. We can, if you like, put it in 4D. But discipline is a given. So there has to be this great thirst. There has to be this level of discipline or austerity or control, self-control. And ultimately, there has to be this clarified buddhi. Yesterday, we told, as part of a passage, Utishta Jagrata Prapyavarandi Bodhada, the famous passage that Swami Vivekananda always quotes, arise, awake, don't stop until the goal is reached. But you heard the expression, a razor-sharp intellect. So we have to sharpen up this determinative faculty to the extent that it becomes a revealing entity. It reveals its own secrets. That behind it is a light that shines and illumines all the fields in front. It's not the buddhi that does it. It's the buddhi that opens a clearing so that we it becomes a reflection, a true reflection, an acknowledged reflection of the pure consciousness that sits behind and expresses itself in these variegated ways. That's the final conclusion, that there is only one thing. That Jesus said, I and the Father are one. When we really meditate and understand this statement, all of these multiplicities come and converge to this one point. That's our goal. Our goal is only one thing, and there's only one seer. Know me to be the knower in all the fields, says Krishna. There's only one knower. It looks like separate knowers, looks like separate seers, separate observers. But when we come to that point, I am the seer, we get this revelation. Tattvamasi, that's what these passages are about. Thou art that. There's only this one that. So this is, I hope this clarifies, or muddies, I'm not sure, but I hope it clarifies this question of these two things, the seer and what is seen. And within the realm of this confusion that we call as an individual jiva. Jiva is the confused state where there's a mix-up, where the seer and the seen become misunderstood to be one entity. And at that point, of course, then that is called jiva. But when we understand the real nature of the self, unencumbered, unsullied by all the other things, pure in its own nature, then we register it to be Atman. It requires cogitating about this. It's a very subtle thing. Very subtle thing. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.